Who should be the backup come next season? Jake Allen or Nico Daws? And also, let's talk about the comparisons between Sam Bennett and Ondrej Palat when it comes to contracts. We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup!
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast. Here at the Locked On Network, I'm your host, college hockey play announcer, Devils are our pucks, pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. On today's episode, let's compare some players. In the first segment, we will compare teammates Jake Allen and Nico Daws. Who should be the backup to Jacob Markstrom come next season? Then in the second segment, let's compare highly touted, pending UFA Sam Bennett and current Devil Ondrej Palat. People are talking and they're saying that Bennett is just going to turn into Palat 2.0. I want to share my thoughts on the matter because I think there's more to that. Then in the third and final segment, speaking of Sam Bennett, I will share my thoughts on the Stanley Cup Finals so far. Keep in mind, I am recording this episode shortly before Game 3. 2 games are already in the books, and now the series shifts to the Sunshine State. All right, let's talk about Jake Allen and Nico Daws. Allen is a pending UFA, and Daws is on the final year of his 2-year, $1.63 million deal. He has an average annual value of $813,000, so very cheap. Why am I making this comparison? Well, Tom Fitzgerald revealed that Jake Allen actually wants to return to the Devils, which is very interesting because Allen is going to be highly sought after, if you ask me, because he's one of, if not the best available goalie on the market. AFP Analytics projects that he is going to earn a 2-year, $7 million deal, which gives him an average annual value of $3.5 million. I'm just like, there's no way the Devils can afford that. Maybe it's time to make Nico Daws the backup. I talked about this in a prior episode. If Jake Allen is serious about returning to the Devils, he's probably aware of the circumstance, which is Luke Hughes needs a new contract. The Devils don't have much cap space to work with. Fitzy wants to change the roster. He doesn't want to run it back with the same group of guys. I think Allen knows what he's getting himself into, and maybe he's willing to play ball and take a bit of a pay cut. But some people are saying that maybe it's time to make Nico Daws the backup because he's proven that he can handle himself. Daws recently spoke at exit interviews, and he shared his thoughts of being the potential backup for the Devils next season and how much his game has grown the past couple of years. Here's what he had to say.
Dawsy, you spend time, between the two leagues this year. Just wondering where you see your game right now, and obviously you were called up to be that third goaltender here, and just what are your sort of impressions about the year for yourself?
Yeah, it was, in terms of, personally my game, I think I've taken a lot of the right steps and making, good progress, a lot of confidence, and I'm happy with where I'm at. Hopefully be able to make a push to make this team next year.
I was going to say, obviously, Markey is here, Jake's a free agent. Is that sort of where you kind of see that you want to be next year in that tandem? Possibly
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, I want to be on this team full time, and I think I'm ready for it, and just going to go into summer working as hard as I can, and have a really good camp and prove to them that I am ready.
What does that look like for a goaltender, especially when you get back on the ice in the summer? Because there's, I'm sure, a lot of things you can't replicate in particular of your position.
Yeah, 100%. I think the off-season it's a time to kind of go over your game and fix a lot of the technical aspects that, it's hard to work on in season. There's not really that much time to practice it. But, just keep, hammering down the things that I need to work on and obviously get strong in the gym, all that kind of stuff.
All right, let's compare the stats, shall we? Nico Daws this past season, he appeared in 6 games. he had a record of 3-1. He had a goals against average of 1.6, a 939 save percentage, and he also recorded one shutout. But something I want to highlight is that Daws really stepped up big time for the Devils when Jacob Markstrom went down with his injury. So Jake Allen became the starter, but Daws was backing up Allen. And in that 5-game span, he had a goals against average of 0.88, a 966 save percentage, and he recorded 3 wins. And that's when he recorded his lone shutout of the season during that span. Goaltending was one of the main strengths for the Devils this past season. So the fact that Daws was able to maintain that because losing Markstrom was big for New Jersey, I think that says something about Daws and his potential. Now, if you look at his AHL stats, they tell a different story. He had a record of 11, 20, and 2. He had a 3.16 goals against average and an 893 save percentage. A lot of people are going to look to that and say, well, he wasn't really good with Utica. But keep in mind, Utica didn't really have that great of a season. They were one of the bottom tier teams in the AHL. In fact, they fired Kevin Dineen just a few weeks into the year. So take those stats with a grain of salt. Now, when looking at Jake Allen, the 34-year-old was still really good. He appeared in 31 games. He had a record of 13, 16, and 1. He had a 2.66 goals against average. He had a 906 save percentage, and he recorded 4 shutouts. Now, here we go. The big question is, do you re-sign Jake Allen, or do you just say, let's go in a different direction and let's make Nico Daws the backup? This is a tough one, if you ask me, because, like I said, if Allen is willing to play ball and take a bit of a pay cut in order to return to the Devils, that makes things more intriguing for me, because I originally said that Allen has to walk in free agency if he's projected to earn a $7 million contract, because I said the only way in which the Devils could possibly afford him is if they buy out Ondrej Palat and then use that money to re-sign him. But even then, that's not really a successful offseason for the Devils, because I want the Devils to be frugal with their money. But for Nico Daws, he's been with the Devils organization for quite some time. Let's go back to the 2021-2022 season. The Devils that year, they used 7 different goalies. And I would argue and say that Daws was by far the best performing goalie that year. In 25 games played, he had a record of 10, 11, and 1, a save percentage of 893, and a goals against average of 3.11. Who were the 6 other goalies for the Devils? John Gillies, he's currently in the ECHL playing for the Orlando Solar Bears. Mackenzie Blackwood, currently with the Colorado Avalanche. Also, Blackwood was dealing with a lot of injuries that season, but what else was new? Jonathan Bernier, I believe that was his final year with the Devils, and then he turned into a Sasquatch. We never saw or heard from him again after that year. Andrew Hammond, the Hamburglar, I don't think I really need to talk much about him. Akira Schmid, he was similar to Daws onto the scene, but now he's in the AHL with the Silver Knights. And then Scott Wedgwood, a pleasant surprise the last few seasons. He's currently with Blackwood in Colorado. But like I said, Nico Daws, of all the goalies that played that season, he was the one that I had the most faith in. So Daws has shown that he's capable of playing really good in between the pipes. And last season, under Lindy Ruff, he was still good. But I think the Devils asked too much out of him, because it was him, Akira Schmid, and Vitek Vanacek. And once again, out of all those 3 goalies from that particular season, Nico Daws, I would argue and say, was the best performing goalie out of the bunch. So I think Daws, his numbers would be much better if he was given a better circumstance. And he was. This season with Jacob Markstrom and Jake Allen, you really saw Nico Daws elevate his game. Now the question is like, am I willing to make him the backup and just move on from Jake Allen? Look, here's what I'm going to say. If you can get a team-friendly deal from Allen, I would say go for it, because you still have plenty of time with Nico Daws, because He will turn 25 later this year. After this season, he'll be an RFA, so the Devils will still hold his rights to some extent. I think you could still work out a cheap deal with Daws because at the most, you're going to get Jake Allen for maybe 1 or 2 years. He's getting up there in age. It gives Daws a little bit more time to marinate and learn from the best. I'm not against making Nico Daws the backup, but my main question is, let's just hypothetically say Jacob Markstrom goes down with an injury. Are you ready to put that sort of responsibility on Daws' shoulders? Because that was one of the main issues that he had last year because Lindy Ruff asked way too much out of him. And remember, the Devils have a history of putting too much pressure on young goalies, asking too much out of them, and it derails their career. Look at Mackenzie Blackwood. Look at Corey Schneider. I just don't want that same circumstance to pan out for Daws. So if he's the backup to Jacob Markstrom, I have no issue. I really hope Markstrom remains healthy. But at the same time, Jake Allen and Jacob Markstrom were a really good duo. Allen had 4 shutouts this season. Markstrom had 4 as well. One of the best goalie duos in the NHL from a number standpoint. So I have no issue with running that back because you can complain all you want about the Devils, but the one thing you couldn't complain about was their goaltending. If you keep that intact and get a better roster in front of them, who knows what will happen. But honestly, there's no wrong answer here. I think it's a win-win for the Devils either way. Option 1, they get Jake Allen on a cheap deal, but you still got Nico Daws right behind him. You also got Mike Yegorov. He's developing really well under Jay Pandolfo. Or option 2 is like you make Daws the backup. He's already shown that he can handle with the rest of them. So I have no issue with him being backup because I see a lot of potential out of him. There's no wrong answer here. Whatever Fitzgerald decides to do with the goaltending, I think the Devils will have a good option either way. So in my opinion, if you can get Jake Allen back, doesn't really hurt you in the grand scheme of things. Maybe sign him to a 1 or a 2 year extension, see what happens, and you just go from there. But I think Nico Daws has flashed enough brilliance to showcase to everyone that he is the real deal. But let me know your thoughts. All right. We're going to talk about Sam Bennett and Ondrej Palat momentarily, but before we continue, let me tell you guys about Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you can stop mismanaging your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, let's compare a couple more players, Sam Bennett and Ondrej Palat. I've talked about Sam Bennett in prior episodes, but I'm seeing a lot of people on social media saying that if the Devils were to hypothetically sign Bennett, they'd just be getting Palat 2.0 because a lot of people aren't really appreciative of Palat's 5-year, $30 million deal. He's being paid annually $6 million. I've talked about it before, but let's compare Bennett and Palat, their circumstances, their playing styles, and I'll give you my thoughts. All right. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, Bennett is a highly touted pending UFA. AFP Analytics is projecting that he is going to earn a 6-year, $39 million deal, 6.63 annually. Bennett's stock is increasing because if you're watching the Stanley Cup final or if you've watched the previous playoff games for the Panthers, Bennett definitely has a hand in a lot of things. But people are saying like, oh, Bennett, his ceiling's not really all that high. He's overrated. People are throwing all sorts of charts and analytics onto the table saying that it's just going to turn into Palat 2.0. Look, I've said it before. I am not the biggest fan when it comes to advanced analytics. I'm more of a bulk stat or does this player meet the eye test for me? That's how I assess players. To each their own, but that's just how I feel, not just in hockey, but other sports in general. People are saying that if the Devils were to sign Bennett to a lengthy contract, it'd just be Palat 2.0. Now, here are the thoughts that I gave in a prior episode. I said, I would love to have someone like Bennett and his capabilities on the roster, but the reality of it is the Devils are not going to be in the running for Bennett. They can't afford him. And even then, I want the Devils to be frugal with their money. And if you put all your eggs into one basket, honestly, that's not a good offseason for Fitzy. That's why I'm saying if you just re-sign Luke Hughes to a lengthy extension and then just call it an offseason, no, you're not a man of your word. You're just running it back with the same roster, hoping for a different outcome. That's not what I want to see the Devils do. But digressing a little bit, I think Bennett is a really good player. He's starting to translate the offensive skills that made him the 4th overall pick back in 2014. He can line up either at center or on the wing. He has the ability to play a good two-way game with plenty of fire and tenacity. A lot of people say he hasn't lived up to the expectations, but that's so subjective. This year, he appeared in 76 games. He had 25 goals, 26 assists for a grand total of 51 points, and he is not afraid to throw his weight around. During the playoffs, so far, 19 games played, 13 goals, 6 assists for a grand total of 19 points. He is a point-per-game player during the playoffs. Once again, not afraid to throw his weight around, and that's why I said his stock is going up, up, and up. A lot of people are high on Bennett, and it's going to put some pressure on the Panthers front office to try to get an extension worked out. Either way, Bennett is going to get himself a bag. Now, when comparing him to Ondrej Palat, here's what people are saying. They're saying that Ondrej Palat did a similar thing with the Lightning, which is his regular season is pretty solid, but come the playoffs, he was able to rise his stock a little bit based on how he played, because during the 2022 playoffs, a contract year for him, he appeared in 23 games. He had 11 goals, 10 assists for a grand total of 21 points. Palat played a decent-sized role with the Lightning, and he was one of the reasons why they were able to appear in 3 straight Stanley Cup final and win 2 cups as a result. Palat was going to earn himself a bag going into the 2022 offseason. But here's what I remember from that particular offseason. Remember, the Devils were swinging for the fences. They had their eyes set on players like Kevin Fiala, Alex DeBrincat, the late, great Johnny Gaudreau. I think at one point when Matthew Tkachuk won it out of Calgary, the betting lines were saying that the Devils were the favorites to potentially land him. Obviously, Tkachuk ended up getting dealt to the Panthers, but that's neither here or there. The Devils were trying to swing for the fences, and they were striking out on a lot of potential big-name players. Now, here comes Ondrej Palat to the mix. I have no doubt in the back of my mind that I think Palat's camp demanded more money from the Devils, because I'm sure they were like, look, we know that our client was not your first option. Now, if you don't want to miss out on your plan B or your plan C, you better fork up some more money. Otherwise, he's going to walk and go somewhere else. I think the Devils were put into a corner because, remember, they signed Palat shortly after they learned that Johnny Gaudreau was going to sign with the Blue Jackets. So that's how we ended up with Palat getting a 5-year, $30 million deal. Now, when looking back to the Bennett circumstance, I can understand where people are coming from, which is like maybe Bennett is punching above his weight class. Will he maintain that same productivity the next few years? It's all subjective. Every player is different. Personally, I think Bennett is a better player than Palat. I think he has a higher ceiling. He's not really a one-dimensional player, because for Palat, I don't know what you really expected out of him, because the last time he scored over 20 goals in a season, you would have to go back more than 10 years ago, 2013, 2014. It's been that long since we saw Ondrej Palat rack up 20 plus goals. In his final year with the Lightning, he had 31 assists during the regular season. In his past 3 years with the Devils, he's nowhere close to matching that. I understand where people are coming from when it comes to Palat and Bennett, but I think the circumstances are a little different. They're two different players at different stages of their careers. For Bennett, I don't think anyone can argue this. The past couple years, he's played one of the biggest roles for the Panthers. Whereas for Palat, when he was with the Lightning, he played an X Factor role. Like, Palat sometimes got overshadowed by the other star players with the Lightning, including Nikita Kucherov, Victor Hedman, Braden Point, you name it. Palat was an X Factor player. Bennett, I would say, is one of the leaders for the Panthers, and I don't think the Panthers are in this circumstance without him. He's played a big role the past few years as to why the Panthers have been able to appear in 3 straight Stanley Cup final. Obviously, it's subjective, but I don't see any point in arguing this because the Devils aren't going to get Bennett. It's not going to happen. They can't afford him, and I think Fitzgerald is going to be more frugal with his finances. How Bennett turns out in the future is not really anyone's concern if you're a part of the Devils discourse. Let's focus on realistic options for the Devils. Look, I love silly season as much as the next person, but I feel like people are taking it a little too far, because the only way that the Devils are going to be successful during the offseason is that they got to look at the trade market. I think that's their best bet. So let's put the Palat and Bennett comparisons to bed, because it really doesn't concern anyone. If he turns out good for whatever team he plays for next season, great. If not, then it's not really the Devils' problem. Okay, speaking of Sam Bennett, let me give you guys my quick thoughts on the Stanley Cup Finals so far, because it's been wildly entertaining. Like I said, I am recording this episode shortly before Game 3, but here are my thoughts after seeing an electrifying Game 2. It's obviously the 2 best teams in the NHL right now, and this has been one of the best starts I've ever seen to the Stanley Cup Final, because it's been an absolute dogfight. McDavid played heavy minutes in Game 2, and it looked like he didn't skip a beat. And his goal in Game 2, incredible footwork. I see why people call him McJesus. Look, I'm not going to call another man Jesus or anything like that. He is incredible, I will say that. But let's talk about some of the older guys. Like, you're seeing like Brad Marchand. He's playing a big role with the Panthers. In fact, he scored 2 goals in the previous game, including the game-winning goal in overtime. I'm loving the rat on the Panthers because, you know, the Panthers have the tradition of throwing rats onto the rink. Obviously, it took place in Edmonton, but Marchand is fitting in really well with Florida. I don't know what Don Sweeney was thinking about trading him to a divisional opponent, but that's neither here or there. But another old player, this time on the Oilers, Corey Perry, tying the game with less than 20 seconds remaining in regulation. And then the game goes into double overtime. The Panthers are the blueprint. They are the example. Look at what Seth Jones and Brad Marchand are doing so far, because both of them have been great additions for Paul Maurice's squad. Sam Bennett, he's continuing to do what he's doing. This is incredible. I'm running out of words to describe it, because I was on the edge of my seat, especially in the double overtime periods. And trust me, I'm no stranger to double overtimes, because the Devils played in 2 double overtime games during their respective series against the Hurricanes. Now the series shifts to Sunrise, and I'm curious to see how the Panthers go about it, because they took care of business. They did what they were supposed to do. You took away home ice advantage for your opposition, but the Oilers they're not going down without a fight. McDavid really wants to win this year. Like, he looks like a man on a mission, and he was really good during Four Nations. And remember, he played a big part as to why Team Canada was able to beat Team USA. I was there front and center. So the Stanley Cup final is just incredible. I know people don't really like seeing the same team in the championships year after year after year. This is the first rematch that we've gotten since, like, what, 2008, 2009, when you had the Red Wings and the Penguins, or as I like to call it, Marian Hossa's first few failed attempts of getting a ring. Luckily, he got one with the Blackhawks, but digressing a little bit, the Panthers have appeared in 3 straight Stanley Cup final. Doesn't seem like anyone is tired of them. And they've kind of formed a little bit of a dynasty. If they repeat as champions and they're able to keep the same group, I think you got to consider them a dynasty. But those are my quick thoughts on the Stanley Cup final. Obviously, I'll share more as the series progresses, but I've been thoroughly entertained. But let me know your thoughts. What do you think the Devils should do when it comes to Jake Allen and Nico Daws? And do you think there's any similarities between Sam Bennett and Ondrej Palat? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X Page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X Page app at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys next episode. Thanks for listening once again.